What if I told you that the short, shuffling steps you've noticed creeping into your walk have nothing to do with your knees? It's not your knees. It's not your age. It's not just how walking changes after 70, no matter how many doctors have told you that with a shrug. The real reason your stride has been shrinking comes down to one small deep muscle almost nobody has ever told you about, tucked so far inside your body that you can't even feel it working. And once you understand what it's actually doing, you'll never look at a short step the same way again. I'm a physical therapist who has spent years working with older adults on exactly this problem. And here's why it matters more than most people realize. Research on community-dwelling older adults shows that falls affect somewhere between 30 and 60% of people over 65 every single year. And by the time you're past 70, gait disorders like the one we're talking about today show up in roughly 1 in 3 people. That's not a small footnote. That's your neighbor, that's possibly you. And the good news is, this particular cause is one of the most fixable things on that entire list. Let me tell you about Carol. Carol is 74, sharp as a tack, still drives herself to church every Sunday. But over the last year, her daughter started noticing something odd. Carol's steps had gotten smaller. Not stumbling, not dragging exactly, just short, quick small steps like she was walking on ice even when the floor was bone dry. Carol herself hadn't really noticed until she tried to step over a garden hose in her backyard and nearly went down. She mentioned it to her doctor, who watched her walk for about 10 seconds and said, "That's pretty normal for your age, just be careful and watch your step." Carol left that appointment with a pamphlet on fall-proofing her bathroom, and absolutely no idea why her own legs suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. She started avoiding the grocery store on rainy days. She stopped walking to get her mail and had her son bring it in instead. Not because anything was broken, she just didn't trust her own stride anymore, and no one had told her why. Before I get into what's actually going on with Carol's steps and yours, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the rest of this series, because we're going to keep building on exactly this kind of practical, no-fluff mobility training. And I want to know if this one's landing for you. If you're enjoying this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 so I know exactly how to make the next one better for you. Okay. Here's the part your doctor probably skipped. Deep inside your pelvis, running from your lower spine, through your abdomen and attaching onto the top of your thigh bone, there's a muscle called the Iliopsoas. Think of it as the string that pulls your knee up and forward every single time you take a step. You've never seen it, you've never felt it directly, but it fires every single time your foot leaves the ground to swing forward. Here's what the research actually shows. This muscle is one of the first in your entire lower body to shrink with age, a process doctors call atrophy, and it happens quietly, with no pain, no swelling, nothing that would send you to a doctor. Studies using muscle sensors on walking adults found that this exact muscle is what determines how far your leg swings forward in that critical final moment before your foot lands. When it's strong, your leg swings out ahead of you and your step lands long. When it's weakened, your leg simply doesn't swing as far. So your brain compensates the only way it knows how. By taking more steps, faster, instead of longer ones. That's why you might notice you're not exactly slower. You're just choppier, quicker, smaller steps instead of the long, confident stride you used to have. Think of it like a string on a marionette that's gone a little slack. The puppet can still move, the mechanism isn't broken. It's just not getting pulled as far as it used to. Your leg is the puppet. The Iliopsoas is the string. And here's something that surprised even the physical therapy community. This pattern often isn't about walking slower overall. Many older adults keep almost the exact same overall walking speed they always had, because the brain quietly compensates by increasing cadence, meaning it simply takes more, quicker, smaller steps to cover the same ground. So on the surface, it can look like nothing's wrong. You're still getting where you're going at roughly the same pace. But underneath, your body has traded long, efficient, stable strides for short, rushed, less stable ones. And that trade is exactly what raises fall risk. Because a shorter, faster gait means less time spent with your foot planted firmly on the ground, and less margin to recover if you catch a toe or lose your footing on uneven pavement. And here's the part that should genuinely give you hope. Unlike a lot of things that go wrong with aging joints, this is a muscle, not a joint, not cartilage. not a nerve that's been permanently damaged. Muscles respond to training at any age, including your 70s, 80s, and beyond. There is real published research showing that targeted work on this exact hip flexor mechanism, especially training that emphasizes the very end of that leg swing, the moment right before your foot lands, is what actually improves step length and gait quality in older adults. Not just any movement and not just walking more of the same short steps, but specific, deliberate training of this exact muscle in this exact motion. This isn't about you being broken. It's about a string that's gone slack and needs to be pulled taut again, deliberately, a few minutes at a time, a few days a week. That's what we're going to do for the next several minutes. Let's start with the seated hip march, because if you've got any hesitation about your balance, this is the safest place to begin, and it's exactly the exercise Carol started with. This one matters because it directly isolates the iliopsoas without asking your balance system to do anything difficult at the same time, so you can build raw strength in that muscle before you ever have to trust it on your feet. Here's how you do it. Sit tall in a sturdy chair with arms, feet flat on the floor, hip width apart. Engage your core gently. Keep your chest lifted and slowly lift your right knee straight up toward the ceiling as high as feels comfortable, without your low back rounding. Hold for 2 full seconds at the top, then lower with control. Don't just drop it. Do 10 to 15 reps on the right, then switch to the left, for a total of 2 to 3 sets per side. The most common mistake here is people using momentum, sort of bouncing the knee up quickly instead of lifting with control, which trains the wrong muscles entirely. The fix. Imagine there's a string tied to your kneecap, and someone is pulling it up slowly and smoothly, not yanking it. Once this feels easy, you can progress by adding a light ankle weight, starting around 1 to 2 pounds, or by holding the top position for a full 5 seconds instead of 2. Next is the standing march with a hold, and this is where we start asking that muscle to work in the position it actually has to work in when you walk. This matters because seated exercises build strength, but your iliopsoas has to fire while you're upright and balancing on one leg, which is exactly what happens during every single step you take. Here's how. Stand behind a sturdy chair or counter, holding on lightly with both hands for support. Lift your right knee up to about hip height, or as close as you comfortably can, and hold that position for 3 full seconds while standing tall on your left leg. Lower with control. Do 8 to 10 reps per side for 2 sets. The mistake almost everyone makes is leaning backward or sideways to help lift the leg, which defeats the purpose entirely, because now your back and side muscles are doing the work instead of your hip flexor. The fix is to keep your trunk stacked directly over your standing leg, tall and neutral the entire time. As this gets easier, progress by reducing your hand support to just 1 finger on the counter, and eventually no support at all, which is exactly the kind of confidence Carol needed to get back to trusting her own steps. The third exercise is the standing hip flexor lunge stretch, and while the first 2 build strength, this one addresses something just as important: tightness. A weak iliopsoas often travels with a tight one, because the muscle spends so much time in a shortened position from sitting that it forgets how to lengthen fully, which shortens your stride even further on top of the weakness. Here's how to do it. Stand with feet hip width apart, hands on a counter or chair for balance. Step your left foot forward about 1.5 feet, keeping your right foot planted behind you. Slowly bend your left knee and gently lean your hips forward, keeping your right leg straight and your torso upright until you feel a stretch along the front of your right hip. Hold for 30 seconds, breathing normally, then switch sides. Do this twice per side. The most common mistake is leaning the upper body forward from the waist instead of shifting the hips forward, which turns this into a back stretch instead of a hip flexor stretch. The fix is to keep your ribs stacked over your pelvis and think about pushing your hip forward, not folding your torso down. Progress this by gently reaching the same side arm overhead once you're comfortable, which deepens the stretch through the entire front line of the hip. Fourth is the supine straight leg raise, which brings the abdominals into partnership with the iliopsoas, because in real walking, these two never work alone. This matters because your core has to stabilize your pelvis while your hip flexor swings your leg forward. And if your core isn't doing its job, your hip flexor ends up working overtime and fatiguing fast, which is part of why your steps get shorter as you tire during a walk. Here's how. Lie on your back on a mat or firm bed. One knee bent with the foot flat on the floor, the other leg fully extended and straight. Gently tighten your abdominals, then lift the straight leg up until your thigh is in line with the opposite bent knee. Hold for a count of 2, then lower slowly and with control, don't let it drop. Do 10 reps per side, 2 sets. The common mistake is letting the lower back arch up off the floor during the lift, which means the hip flexor is being helped by the low back instead of working on its own. The fix is to press your low back gently into the mat throughout the entire movement, the whole time your leg is moving. Progress by extending the hold at the top to a count of 5, or by adding a small ankle weight once form is solid. Fifth, the side-lying leg raise, which trains the muscles on the outer hip that stabilize your pelvis every time your opposite leg swings forward in a step. This matters because Carol's problem wasn't only that her hip flexor had weakened, it was that her pelvis was slightly unstable with every step, which made her brain even more cautious about taking a full-length stride, compounding the short step pattern. Here's how. Lie on your side with your bottom leg slightly bent for stability, top leg straight, keeping your heel slightly higher than your toes so you're not accidentally working the front of the hip instead. Slowly lift your top leg about 12 to 18 inches, hold for 2 seconds, then lower with control. Do 10 reps per side. The common mistake is rolling the hips backward as the leg lifts, which lets momentum do the work. The fix is to keep your hip bones stacked directly on top of each other. Imagine a wall behind your back that you can't let your hips touch. Progress with a loop resistance band placed just above the knees. Sixth is the glute bridge, which might seem like an odd addition to a hip flexor video, but it's essential because the glutes are the Iliopsoas' direct opposite number, and if they're weak, your hip flexor tightens up to compensate, shortening your stride from the other direction. This matters because a step isn't just about swinging your leg forward, it's about your back leg pushing off powerfully behind you. And that push comes from the glutes, not the hip flexor at all. Here's how. Lie on your back, knees bent, feet flat on the floor hip width apart, arms at your sides. Press through your heels and lift your hips up until your body forms a straight line from shoulders to knees, squeezing your glutes hard at the top. Hold for 3 seconds, then lower slowly. Do 12 reps, 2 sets. The common mistake is pushing through the toes instead of the heels, which shifts the work into the quads and calves instead of the glutes. The fix is to consciously drive through your heels, and you can even lift your toes slightly off the floor to make sure you're doing it right. Progress by holding at the top for 5 seconds instead of 3, or by performing it one leg at a time once you're confident. The seventh and final exercise is the resisted step-up, and this is the one that ties everything together, because it's the closest thing to actual walking that we do in this entire routine. This matters because it asks your newly strengthened iliopsoas to lift your leg while your body weight is shifting in a standing position, which is exactly the demand your hip flexor faces with every single step you take outside this room. Here's how. Stand in front of a sturdy step or the bottom stair of your staircase about 4 to 6 inches high, holding a railing if needed. Step up fully with your right foot, driving your left knee up to hip height at the top before stepping back down with control. Do 8 reps per side, 1 set to start. The common mistake is using a step that's too high too soon, which shifts the work to the glutes and quads of the pushing leg rather than the hip flexor of the lifting leg. The fix is to keep the step low enough that you can clearly feel the lifting leg's hip flexor doing the work at the top, not just the pushing leg doing all the effort. Progress this by increasing the step height gradually, by an inch or 2 at a time. Once 8 clean reps feels easy. Before you try any of these, a few important notes. If you have an active hip labral tear, a recent hip or knee replacement that hasn't been cleared for strengthening, uncontrolled high blood pressure, or any diagnosed balance disorder like vertigo, please get clearance from your doctor or physical therapist before starting, especially the standing exercises. Anyone with significant osteoporosis should be cautious with the step-up and should keep movement slow and controlled rather than fast. And the golden rule that applies to every single one of these. If you feel sharp pain, not muscle fatigue, but actual sharp or pinching pain, stop that exercise immediately. Mild muscle tiredness the next day is normal. Joint pain is not. Wear supportive, closed-back shoes for the standing exercises. Never socks on a hard floor. And always have a sturdy chair or counter within reach for the first few weeks until your balance and confidence catch up with your new strength. Here's what I want you to sit with. That slack string we talked about, the one that's been letting your steps get shorter and shorter without you fully understanding why, that's not a life sentence. It's not just getting older. It's a specific, trainable muscle that responds to specific, consistent work. The same work Carol started doing 3 times a week after her daughter showed her this exact routine. Within a few weeks, Carol wasn't thinking about her hip flexor at all anymore, because she didn't have to. She was just walking out to get her own mail again, stepping over that garden hose without a second thought, and for the first time in over a year, chasing her grandson across the backyard without that flicker of fear in the back of her mind. That's what a slightly longer, more confident step actually buys you. Not just better numbers on a Gait test, but the freedom to walk to your own mailbox, to keep up on the sidewalk, to move through your own life without constantly negotiating with your own body. If you found this helpful, you'll want to stick around because in an upcoming video we're going to tackle the muscle most people blame for balance problems, when the real culprit is usually hiding somewhere else entirely. Until then, here's to living life on your own terms. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1. If not, comment 0. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.